area of innovation. A lot of organisations, particularly in Australia and other organisations I know globally, are using things like deliberate time or space in organisations. They'll put some time into hackathons and bringing people together. Are you a fan of creating that space? Because I know that you talk about that a little bit.
Yes, if.
Tell me more about the yes if.
So, um, I am all about, I mean, innovation is not an event. Innovation is a practice, it's a capability, et cetera. So that's not to say that events don't have a place. They do. But if you treat innovation like it only happens at the sprint,
Yeah.
here's a question. How many medals have you won? And for most people, they have a bunch of sprints or a bunch of hackathons, and they have nothing in the trophy case.
Yeah.
And you wonder why. Well, here's why. Who's practicing?
Yeah.
Who's in the gym? Who's on the track? Most people show up to
Mm.
the sprint, and you know what they do? They pull a hamstring.
I
Okay?
love it.
There's no trophy. They're in the hospital. Why? They pull a hamstring because they haven't stretched. And then they're told to
Yeah.
go sprint. I mean, it's like, imagine if you and I go, okay, Josephine, we're both going to go sprint around the block right now.
Yeah.
We both come
Yeah.
back limping, right?
Yeah, exactly. Mm.
Because you have to stretch, you have to warm
Mm-mm.
up, you have to condition, and then the sprint can serve an amazing. It is the place to win medals,
Yeah.
provided that you've been doing the work of practice.
Yeah.
For many organizations, the sprint has become a replacement for
Mm.
practice that will never work.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So in your experience, that practice, that daily practice, whose responsibility is that? Are we really talking about leaders bringing this into organizations? Where has that worked from an implementation point of view? Where has that worked well for you? And who has the who has the mantle, who has the charge for this?
There's a couple of answers. One is it's a deeply personal, fundamentally, ideas happen in brains. And and there's a lot. I actually have a colleague at Harvard who contends that people aren't creative,
Mm-mm.
which I just don't get me started. Um, um, so whatever, that's fine, okay. But to me, ideas happen. They don't have like there's no ideas popping up on my wall right now or popping
Mm.
up on my computer right now.
Mm-mm. Yeah, they're not
You know,
out
it's
there.
just it's like saying a baby can be conceived without the act of conception. It's like it doesn't happen. We haven't figured that out yet. Same with ideas. They actually happen in a brain. Okay.
Yeah.
So there is a sense of the individual human capacity for
Mm-mm.
conception. What do I do with inputs? What do I do? How do I synthesize them? How do I play with them? How do I experiment with them, et cetera? And so there's kind of the individual component, which is critical and which requires practice and attention and development and cultivation, just like, anything else. But then there's also the organizational piece. And I would say
Yeah.
an organization's responsibility is both to encourage the individual practice and to create space for communal collaborative practice, right? And so if you think about, so setting aside the individual, not because they're unimportant, but because they're so important, we have to talk about them separately. Setting aside the individual for a second, there's a really important finding, which is good ideas come from bad ideas, okay? Where is the space for bad ideas in your
Yeah.
company?
Mm-mm-mm.
Where is the person who is willing to share the bad idea? Where's the leader who is safe to share a bad idea with? Like Sir Johnny Ive tells the story when he was working with Steve Jobs. He said,
Mm-mm.
every day Steve used to say to me, hey, Johnny, here's a dopey idea.
Ah.
He
Ah,
said most of the time
interesting.
his
Yeah.
ideas were pretty dopey.
Yeah.
In fact, sometimes they were truly terrible. But every once in a while, they take the air out of the room.
Yeah.
And Steve Jobs knew where good ideas come from is relationships where bad ideas can be shared.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what you have to do as a leader is you actually have to lower the bar. And
Yeah.
there are lots of ways to do that. There's, I mean, in gifted facilitators, there's an incredible role for a gifted facilitator to basically normalize play and to normalize silliness and and you go, silly? I go, yeah. Serious isn't working, you know?
Yeah,
Is
yeah,
how's
exactly.
serious working for you?
Yeah, yeah.
And if serious isn't working, what makes you think that then what makes you think silly won't, right? But anyway, it's not that we're being frivolous or that we're being
Mm-mm.
stupid or that we're commissioning nonsense. It's none of that. But it's recognizing there's we've talked a little bit about volume. There's also
Yes.
variation. Variability is really essential.
Mm-mm.
Creativity and innovation is essentially a numbers game, and what you want to do is kind of put
Mm-mm-mm.
shots on goal. And so, how do you think about broadening the shots on goal? You've got to create space for people to be safe to have bad ideas. Amy Edmondson has done a ton of work on this at
Yeah,
Harvard on psychological safety,
yeah.
and so lots of ink has been spilled. But the point is, it's a both. It's not a either or. It's a both and.
Mm-mm.
There's an individual responsibility, and there's an organizational responsibility.
Yeah. And I think we there's a lot of you know energy around that topic of psychological safety that I'm hearing, and particularly in Australia, we've changed our Work Health and Safety Act to include a focus on psychosocial hazards. So people are focused on well-being and psychological safety, but I think the innovation dimension has dropped off that, and people think of psychological safety as needing to help employees feel safe, which then goes to a conservative response to that. And so there's
Right.
almost like that distortion of that idea. And I keep saying, psychological safety is about feeling safe to be uncomfortable. In other words, you can share the dopey idea and you can
Mm.
feel, because that might be a little bit uncomfortable or you might be vulnerable in doing that. Because you put yourself out there when you share a dumb idea, but that
Mhm.
it lands in a safe place.
Mhm.
And that people can have the capability, the competency to give you feedback in a way that doesn't destroy you, so that you don't give another bad idea tomorrow. Because that's
Yeah.
often the case, isn't it? We're not very good at receiving and giving feedback. That is not a competency. That is a default for most
Well,
most people in
I
organizations.
think it's in part, maybe not entirely, but at least in part, it's due to this abdication of responsibility that the environment isn't my job, or the environment is nobody's job,
Mm-mm.
or rather the environment is everybody's job.
So
If the
nobody does
environment
it.
is everybody's job, it's nobody's job. And
Yeah.
if it's nobody's job to attend to the environment, then and who's almost, you can think about it, there's a product manager of the environment. That's what there should be. And if it's no
Mm-hmm.
one's job to attend to the environment like a product that needs attention and product market fit and iteration and experimentation, then is it any wonder that
Yeah.
the environment isn't conducive to creativity? No, not at all.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, exactly, exactly. Um, so Jeremy, I'm really getting a lot of inspiration from this conversation. I keep thinking back to my older experience at my older workplace, because what we did, I think in some ways I can see where we went wrong in some ways, because we institutionalized design thinking. We created a center for design thinking and we made it the responsibility of one function of the organization. And but we didn't that necessarily didn't it didn't incorporate the team's practice. I think the director of the center was trying to influence teams, but the
Mhm.
responsibility was with that person. It's your job to be the director of innovation or director of design thinking, rather than creating an accountability across all teams and instituting some of these daily practices. We created an academy in a way internally,
Mhm.
which made it a little bit inaccessible,
Yeah.
because it became this knowledge base that wasn't necessarily in everybody's ballpark. So I can see how that could have worked. Where do you think, in terms of creating a viral level of implementation of this, because what a scalable level of implementation, because I can see how I can apply it in my daily life, and perhaps if I'm a team leader I can apply it with my team. But what do you need to really create a shift in an organization so that it becomes that norm? It becomes a norm to be discussing bad ideas and allowing space for inspiration as a normal part of the business, you know, as the work routine, a normal part of the
Well,
way we work.
I have two answers to that question. One is ultimately you need a CEO who sees the necessity of innovation.
Mm.
So that's one thing. If you have a CEO who's satisfied, who's content, none will say that, by the way. But if they aren't pushing,
Yeah.
if they really aren't pushing the organization, not just to do what they're doing better, but to be figuring out better things to do, then that would be evidence of contentment. And if there is, so that's one thing. The other thing I would say is it's largely, well, okay, well, I'll illustrate. So sorry, remind me to say down, not up. Okay, I'll come back to that. So just, put a bookmark on that, down, not up. I had Astro Teller, who's the head of Google X, on my podcast a while back. And he said something that I found, it's just to this point about the CEO. He said, it's kind of awkward because I used to get asked to give innovation lectures, an hour-long lecture on innovation. But he said, the problem is it only takes me a minute to give a lecture on innovation. And it's kind of awkward because we don't know what to do with the other 59 minutes. And I said, well, what's the minute? And he said, raise your hand if you are willing to take a 10% chance at $1 billion idea rather than 100% chance at $1 million idea. He said, everybody raises their hand because just mathematically speaking, it's a $10 million, expected value versus $1 million, right? He said, now keep your hand up if your CEO and your board agree with you. And he said, every hand in the place goes down. And he said, you don't need a new innovation. You need a new leader. And to me, that is so, which is to say, there's a significant role for the leader to play. And one question that an individual should ask themselves is kind of a seed versus soil, as I've heard it said. There's something to be said for the soil itself, the environment, choose and being thoughtful and discerning about choosing an environment which is highly likely to be conducive to innovation, right? So that's kind of one thing. That's like kind of a priori conditions before you choose a job, right? Okay, so that's that part. Now I want to get to the other part, which is down versus up. Given that you're already in a job, and given that you are not looking to change your job, then what has to be done, I think it's useful to ask, what can I personally do within my sphere of influence, within the span of control that I hold presently? And think about managing behaviors downward rather than trying to change someone else's management of you upward, right? So for example, Astro Teller, just to use the same person, he has a simple kind of give me five, interaction with teams where they're coming up with an idea. He always says, I want five, not one, I want five, give me five. And people hear that and they go, man, I wish my boss said, give me five. I go, okay, no, stop. You start saying, give me five to the people who report to you, right? Yeah. That's managing down versus managing up. And a lot of times, granted, the very best is to choose an environment that expects innovation, that demands it, and that it encourages behaviors in keeping with it. That's like an a priori condition. Given where you are now, if you're unwilling to leave your job, which would be an intellectually honest way of approaching the problem, if you're unwilling to leave your job, which for whatever reason many people are, think about changing the expectations in your sphere of control rather than bemoaning the fact that someone else doesn't do the thing that a really innovative leader does. You be the innovative leader who has innovative expectations of the innovative people who are working for you.
Yeah, absolutely, and create that beautiful bubble. And in some ways, I think that that's also a way to, get out of a mindset that we're just victims of an environment as well. I think that's really good advice, because that doesn't lead to good outcomes for you personally or the organisation anyway. I really enjoyed this conversation with Jeremy, and it's not over yet. There's a part 3, so look to the next video for that.